Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I think we're going to have a very interesting and informative presentation that we do have a lot of questions about legal relationships and the differences between them. So hopefully Attorney Warden will answer a lot of your questions. If you do have questions, put them in the chat as we go along, and he'll address this the ones what he can. And so hopefully we'll get everybody information that they've been needing to know. My name's Barb Turpin, and I'm with the Ohio Grandparent Kinship Coalition. Dr. Ware and Lynn Stevens are not currently on, so I'm going to do the introductions and announcements and then turn it over to Attorney Warden. Please, caregivers, put your name in the chat box, please, to be eligible to receive a $50 gift card. At the end, we'll announce the recipient of the gift card. And our next meeting will be Monday, August the 19th. We are going to be preparing for Advocacy Day in September. It will be September 9th. And what we are planning on doing is having a Contact Your Legislators Day, where we're going to be setting up email and phone contacts for you to send information to your legislators about what caregivers need. And so in August, we are going to be going over the plan for that and how caregivers are going to be able to do that on that day and any day after that. So we want to make sure that everybody has a good understanding of how that's going to happen. And it's going to be very important. September is Caregiver and Grandparent Recognition Month. And so we plan on having a proclamation from the governor and, just celebrating our caregivers and making sure our legislators know that there are needs out there that have not been met for over 20 years, and it's time to start meeting them. Certificates of attendance are available. Just contact me. I will put my email in the chat if you don't have it, to let me know if you want a certificate, and we'll provide you one for if you have to have work or for some, training hours or whatever. We don't have accreditation for social workers, but it'll confirm that you did attend the presentation. And again, our meeting topic today is information about legal guardianship, legal partnerships with healthcare providers, and access to legal services. Our presenter is Attorney Joseph K. Warden. He is with Advocates for Basic Legal Equity, ABLE. He was admitted to the bar in 1989. He's a graduate of Wittenberg University and the University Dayton School of Law. He works as a senior attorney for Medical Legal Partnership in the Dayton office. The partnership has now further expanded its work to include an opioid project focused on child victims of the opioid crisis, which many of the caregivers have experience with. A lot of them have children who have been placed because of that. Attorney Warden's cases include representing children who've been victims of domestic violence abuse, neglect, as well as kinship caregivers such as grandparents who seek to obtain custody of their grandchildren. Other practice areas include guardianships and representing families on housing-related issues such as extreme harmful conditions and evictions. Attorney Warden has been featured in Ohio Lawyer magazine for his casework on behalf of domestic violence victims, and in 2015 accepted on behalf of the Medical Legal Partnership, the Center for Health Communities, their 19th Annual Health Promotion Program Award. He has also been recognized for his efforts in advocating for victims of domestic violence, having been selected by Artemis Domestic Violence Center as a participant in Dayton Men Against Domestic Violence campaign of October 2020. We welcome Mr. Warden. He has extensive background and obviously contact with caregivers, and so hopefully he's going to be presenting information that will be very useful to you. Good morning, Mr. Warden, and thank you.
Well, good morning. That was quite an introduction. You got me blushing here. Let me bring this up. Okay. Well, that was a nice introduction. Let me just say that again. And certainly, um, working with kinship caregivers, um, and I'm sure you all know this, that the role of the kinship caregiver has grown exponentially over the last many years. You all have your grandchildren, you may be a grandparent, you may be another relative, and you become a kinship caregiver. It's a major change in your life. And often it's difficult to know what to do, what direction to turn, and who to get help from. And certainly having legal authority to make decisions for that child or children with you is probably almost a number one priority, because without it, you're going to have a hard time enrolling a child in school, getting health care, doctors, dentists, whatever else comes up. If you don't have, for example, like a grandparent power of attorney or guardianship, you're going to have a very difficult time. So I just want to say thank you for the invite. I am very pleased to be here. This is a super important group. And I just think, more resources need to be put towards this. And hopefully the state is moving in the right direction. So we'll start here. I've got a PowerPoint. And so if there are any questions that come up, I'm not sure, Brenda or Barb, somebody can kind of tell me where they are and I'll go to the chat. But let's just begin. I want to tell you a little bit about who we are. And if you were here, I think a couple of weeks ago when my colleague Lisa McIntosh was here, she probably told you that Advocates for Basic Legal Equality, we're a civil legal aid firm. We're a nonprofit regional law firm that provides what I think is very high quality legal assistance in civil matters to help eligible low-income individuals and group in Western Ohio. We want our clients to achieve self-reliance and obtain for them equal justice and economic opportunity. So that's just a little introduction they like us to use. Now, what do I do? As Barbara said, I'm a senior attorney on our medical legal partnership project. And for all of you who may not know what that is, I'm going to spend a few slides talking about it. But I want you to think in terms of this, just what it says, medical legal partnership. We work with community healthcare providers. We are embedded in those organizations where we train social workers, community health workers, doctors, nurses, because we want them to be able to spot and be able to talk to their patients about legal issues that are negatively impacting their health and the health of the children in their care. So I'll kind of go through this. I try not to read these slides verbatim, but I've got them to a point where it's good information, so I like to go through it. As I said, it's a healthcare delivery model to improve patient and population health. The medical legal partnership is based on evidence that many people never seek out lawyers, okay? But they do talk to their trusted healthcare professionals, their doctors, their nurses. So who better to refer these families to legal services? And that's why it's so important. We provide legal services right through, for example, Dayton Children's. They were our first partner. Five Rivers Health Centers, community health centers, the places in our community where people go for their health care, they also get legal care, okay? The medical legal partnership has skyrocketed. When I started this, long time ago, I'm old. It was just a beginning concept. And now, and this number is probably a little off, over 450 medical legal partnerships in this country, okay? And what we do is we address the social determinants of health. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, but just to kind of go through it, what are those social determinants of health? Okay, that's everything we are. Let me go back there. Let me go back. Okay. Anything that could be impacting your life and those of the children with you, such as their education, family resources, family safety and stability, access to healthcare, food, Housing is a big one. We do a lot of housing work as far as evictions, but mainly for a lot of my kinship caregivers, I see a lot of housing conditions issues. Mold is a big one. Lead is a big one. They got a lot of that up in Toledo. It's kind of interesting. And I was growing up and you'd hear about lead poisoning. We thought that had all gone away, back in the 70s and 80s. And now it's come back around again. Okay. So just see here. Let me move this. So the social determinants of health for children are conditions in which they live, learn, in which they play. 60 or 70% or greater of our health and our children's health are determined by these social determinants of health. Okay. So what we like to do, we go into medical organizations and we want to encourage the social workers and physicians to ask questions of their patients. For example, how's your child doing in school? Or how's your grandchild doing in school? Maybe that grandchild needs an IEP. Maybe the grandparent has asked the school, hey, I think there's an issue here. Can you have my child evaluated? Maybe the school said, you know what? We don't think there's an issue. We're not going to do that. Maybe you have custody of your grandchild who has missed a lot of school. Maybe they're coming from a home where there was opioid addiction and that child saw a lot of things in that home. Maybe didn't attend school, maybe was a witness to domestic violence. Okay. So while our doctors will treat the healthcare, it only makes sense that you bring in a lawyer to handle all of these other issues. And I kind of repeated this, but it's an MLP is a partnership between civil legal aid and healthcare centers, where our healthcare partners can refer their patients to our law firm for health harming legal needs. And I already covered a few areas. And the social determinants of health, we're going to break that down in this next slide. We look at 7 areas. And if you all think about your lives and everything that's going on in you, this kind of one or more of these may impact you, such as housing, food, SNAP benefits we talk about, access to healthcare, family safety and stability. I've had many kinship caregivers over the years that I've had to go to court and get protection orders for against their own parents. All right. Financial resources, education, and it all centers on your health and that of the children living with you. And we'll use grandchildren, but I know there are many kinship caregivers who are not grandparents. I've got aunts, uncles, adult brothers, adult sisters, and it kind of all lumped into that as kinship caregivers. But I'm assuming for the most part that we have grandparents here in this audience. Okay, so how do those 7 social determinants of health, kind of a little bit more detail on those? We talk about housing, we talk about eviction and foreclosure, conditions issues. And I think of a story I had just a couple of years ago. I had a very nice grandparent I represented, and she had her grandchild placed with her. She had been renting a very small home for many years, and the landlord had allowed that home to fall into disrepair. And by disrepair, I mean the roof. It was so bad that when it rained, she literally was putting buckets down in her home to catch the rainwater. She tried many times to get the landlord to do anything, and they simply didn't. She was put in touch with us. That child, I believe, treated at, I want to say Dayton Children's, maybe one of our other partner locations. And, we reached out to the landlord, and I didn't come out all angry and mad. What I did was I called the landlord. I followed up with an email and a letter, and I sent this landlord pictures of the conditions this grandmother was living in. Okay. Pictures worth 1,000 words. I got to tell you, very shortly thereafter, they went over, they tarped the roof. They eventually repaired the roof. And then they started on the inside where water damage, you all know, is just terrible. Mold, mildew, it was pretty bad. So they began working on the inside of that home and brought it back up to code, brought it back up to the standards. And we did all this without actually even going to court. Okay. Interestingly enough, just when I'm thinking we're going to close that case, I get a call from my client, this grandmother, and she says, "Hey, guess what the landlord wants to do?" And I'm sure y'all know where I'm going with this. He wants to raise the rent, right? Well, of course he does. There wasn't a lot I could do about that, but I decided to take that extra step, and I called the landlord, and he and I had a very nice conversation, and he agreed to hold off for another year on raising her rent. She was on a very fixed income. Obviously, things were very tight. She was getting no child support. I believe the dad, I think he was incarcerated. I think mom was homeless, so there was no child support, but he did agree to hold off for a year. So that's just one example of a housing conditions case that we did work on that I believe had a happy ending. Okay, so we're going to get into guardianships here shortly, but just to talk to you again about the different areas that we do work on: eviction, custody cases. I've represented grandparents and great grandparents in custody matters. I have a great grandmother, actually, a couple of them, who went in on their own and filed for emergency custody of their grandbabies. Okay, and we've assisted with that. Um, We've done denial of benefits. For example, let's say you have a grandchild with you that for some reason Social Security says, "Hey, we're not." Let's say your grandchild's on Social Security. Maybe your child's disabled. Maybe they're eligible some other way, and all of a sudden you get a letter saying, "We're not going to pay this anymore." You're probably going to need some legal help. So we work on Social Security denial matters, education matters, and of course guardianships, which is why we're here today. Any questions yet? Y'all still with me?
Hi, Mr. Warden. This is Barb Turpin. First off, I want to acknowledge Mr. Demetrakis. He provided some personal information in in the chat about his situation. He and his wife have legal custody of their 11-year-old grandson since 2015. His daughter began using heroin soon after birth and lost custody, and he's been retired. And so he's sharing that, he's one of these that where the impact of the opioid and drug crisis has affected their family, and they've stepped up to, provide the care and support that the grandchild needed.
Yes.
The one question I have, when you talked about you had an experience with a grandmother filing for custody, is it possible for caregivers, if they don't qualify for, say, legal aid services, to file for custody without legal representation?
Yes, it is. Let me handle that first. I want to back up and talk about the gentleman who very kindly shared that information. Yes, many courts around the state, many juvenile courts are real good. When you go to you're in a certain county. Let's use Montgomery County, for example. You go to Montgomery County, Ohio Juvenile Court, and they have an incredible form section. They're making it easier and easier for persons to file pro se without a lawyer. In fact, in Montgomery County, they have an Office of Citizen Services right down in the basement there. They call it the lower level, which will assist you in filling out forms. And many of the kinship caregiver custody cases that I do receive, the grandparents have already gone in and filed. They have filled out those forms and they have filed. Okay. So to answer your question, Barbara, yes, you can do it pro se. And given the number of cases, quite often we can't accept every case. Okay. I will oftentimes assist grandparents who have filed pro se by providing them with counsel and advice. And when I say counsel and advice, I don't mean just send a letter saying, "Here's what's going to happen and good luck." But we keep their case open. We talk to them about preparing for court, what's going to happen, whether you need to subpoena a witness, and the kind of things you're going to need to prove to get custody of your grandchild, which essentially is the unfitness of the parents. Now, in many of the cases where you have your grandchild with you, unfitness, it's a high bar, but in many of these cases, it's not difficult to prove, especially when that child with you is a victim of the opioid crisis. And certainly for us, and we started that project about 3.5 years ago, Well, I'll tell you, you talk about the victims of the crisis that really, to a large extent, are not really thought about. It's the child victims. I've worked on dozens of cases where these children are born and they're addicted. They find drugs in their system, and it is extremely sad. These are our youngest victims. Okay. These are our young victims who have seen their parents overdose. They've lived in houses where the utilities have been shut off because the parents, having those substance use disorders, what we say, are using the money to, let's say, to buy, this is very cruel to say this, but to buy their own drugs. So these children, these child victims are the most important to us. And our project, and we're still continuing it. And we've got applications pending right now for the One Ohio Recovery Fund, which I'm sure you all have heard of. And hopefully we're going to be able to continue on with that work because it's just incredible to me that, and as the gentleman pointed out, substance use disorder, once it gets in there and it takes a hold, these children do need to be protective. In fact, that led me to that one case where the great grandmother could no longer sit by and watch what was happening, which is why she filed for emergency custody. But thank you for your comment. And Barbara, thank you for your question.
We have another a question now
Sure.
from Darlene. What
All
about
right.
dedicated accounts for Social Security? What can the funds be used for, as Social Security is not clear about the use of funds?
Yeah. There's a lot of information out there. I wish my director, Becky Steinhauser, was here. She is our Social Security expert. And Brenda and I think we were talking right at the beginning that I do think we need to have or dedicate training to Social Security related issues, stable account issues. And as far as the Social Security, the general rule of thumb is you're going to use it on those necessities. Okay. So we know that a child needs a place to live. We know that the utilities need to be on. We know that child needs food, clothing, those types of things. The best advice I can give you is to keep very, very accurate track. I mean, you don't have to write an encyclopedia or not, but certainly keep those accounts separate. Do not commingle funds and keep track of everything you're using that money for as the payee. And I'm assuming that most of you who have grandchildren getting Social Security are the payees.
Thank you for that. And we have one.
But I do think, like I said, I think that, and I again just thank you so much. This group is so wonderful, and I work with the kinship caregivers at Dayton Children's, and it's just so great to have a almost statewide coalition here to talk to. But I do think we should have my director, Becky Steinhauser, on there, and we do some Social Security work. And we talk about that question said, well, I want to make sure I spend my money properly. I don't exactly know what to do. And I think that's really important. And I've had grandparents that I've sat down for an hour with my director, and we've gone through these things. So I think maybe here by the end of the summer, that needs to be on the list, right?
Thank you. We definitely can look into that in terms of the our planning for future trainings and keep that as a topic. I have one more sort of a question, and if you can't address this, attorney, I probably can give a response. The question is, what can caregivers, providers do when they do not fall into the income guidelines for benefits such as SNAP for the minors that they're caring for, because they have legal custody and income is being based off the caregiver's income, and the Ohio TANF, the child is being used against the minor for benefits?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is an issue because I think of things such as just the cost of living. For example, we've all been to grocery stores recently, and I think I was the other day, and I think it was almost like $5 for a loaf of bread, which is insane. And certainly household income and not qualifying for benefits, that's a big issue. And Barbara, again, it's not necessarily my area. As far as if you don't qualify, obviously you can. There's an appeal or a process, administrative process to uh, appeal that decision. But the results, in my experience, quite often are the same when they look at that household income. But Barbara, if you know more about that than me, I'm more than
Okay.
welcome to listen to you.
Well, yeah, this is a question that comes up quite often, and uh, the Ohio Grandparent Kinship Coalition is attempting to try to get some changes made. Although it's not a fast track, but unfortunately, the SNAP benefits are tied to the income of a caregiver, and that
Yeah,
is a federal requirement. And these are changes that aren't going to happen overnight, but we are going to be addressing them from Ohio, as well as the national coalition that's been formed. And you're right. Again, even if you appeal, that's not going to change the outcome. The
yeah,
OWF is a different animal, and the cash assistance is not based on the income of the caregiver. It is for the child only, which is a benefit, fortunately, for the caregivers. It doesn't cover everything, but right now, again, that's another issue that we're trying to address, and increasing that benefit for caregivers. And during our advocacy month appeal to legislators, that is going to be one of the issues that we're going to address with them. So we know that caregivers struggle with the small amount of benefits that they do get, and so we're working to advocate better for that, and we're going to use our caregivers to do the same for themselves. So thanks for
yeah,
asking the question.
yeah, yeah. It is. It's like you said. It's very difficult when they look at that household income. One of the things we also think about, everyone says, well, why aren't you getting child support? Go for child support. And yes, you all should. Getting that child support is sometimes extremely difficult, extremely difficult. Neither parent is working. Sometimes you might not even know where the parents are. Maybe they're, living, maybe they're couch surfing. But certainly pursuing that child support is important. And the Child Support Enforcement Agency is there to do that for you. Now, it does take time, but if you get um, uh, to a point where you see one of the parents are working, then you all need to pursue that and don't give up on that, because it can work. And certainly, Barbara, what you're talking about is continuing a legislative solution. That's really what's going to be the key, I think. Okay. So we want to talk about guardianship of minors. So we're going to start with some basic law here. Guardianship of a minor, that's any person under 18. 18 and older, you'll be doing adult guardianships. And I've mixed a little of that in because some of you, and these are the guardianships we do at 18 and above, we do quite a few of those where that child is disabled, unable to care for him or herself, and you need to have that in place. And we get a lot of those. Last month, my goodness sake, I must have taken in 8 new referrals for adult guardianships where a child is turning 18 or 19 years old. And we've done a lot of training and education on this at our medical partners locations because, quite frankly, there's a lot of people who don't really think about that. They've been coming in with their grandchild for years and years and making medical decisions, and all of a sudden this grandchild is 18 years old. This grandchild might have certain disabilities, learning disabilities, physical impairments, and this child cannot continue as an adult to care for him or herself. And so you need to have this in place. Okay. And also at the same time, that 18-year-old is not competent to sign a power of attorney. So you got to have a guardianship. But what we're going to focus on today is guardianship of a minor, where that grandchild is living with you and you need that legal authority. It can be found at the Ohio Revised Code 2111 1.12. Okay. Um, uh, Guardianship governs guardianships for any person less than 18 who has neither a father nor a mother, whose parents are unsuitable to have custody of such a minor, or whose interests will be promoted by a guardianship. And I would dare say that for all of you would fall within that definition. Maybe not having a father or mother. No, we have seen several of those where one parent has passed. But more or less, we're going to be looking at a situation where you're going to tell the court the parents are unsuitable to have custody. Okay. A couple of basic legal terms for you all to know. You will hear terms such as the ward. Okay. That's the minor who is receiving the guardianship is known as the ward. And as the kinship caregiver, you are called the guardian. Okay, basic legal terms, but important terms. Okay, there are three types of guardianships for minors. And the one we do, actually the only one we do, is guardianship of the minor's person. You have guardianship of the person, guardianship of the estate, or both, person and estate. I like to tell my clients that the guardianship of the person, because most of these minors, they don't have an estate. When you think of estate, you think of money. Okay. Obviously, 99.9, they don't have any. They have their Social Security coming in, but that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. Where the minor somehow has money and you need to take charge of that money and see that it's spent properly. We just don't see that. Okay. And we do get it once in a while if there's a personal injury case. But the one we work on is guardianship of the person. It's granted when the ward's parents are unable or unwilling to provide care or guidance for the ward, or when the minor's interests will otherwise be promoted through a guardianship. Okay. And that's what we're talking about today, mainly guardianship of the person. If you think you need guardian for the minor's estate, your child, your grandchild has got to have something. Maybe there was a trust account. Maybe they have money in the bank. We don't do guardianships of the estate. It's not a lot more difficult, but you do have to be bonded. You have to get an insurance bond. There's all kinds of other requirements. So what I'm going to focus on today is guardianship of the minor's person. And remember this, and I put this in red, by law, the probate court is always the superior guardian of the minor ward. And as guardians, you must obey all orders of the court. Okay, and we'll get into that more in just a few minutes here. Any questions on the three types of guardianships of the minor? No?
I just,
Go ahead.
and this is just a sort of, some input into as you move forward. If you can also sort of distinguish what is between the guardianship and custody, legal custody, which, if there's what the differences are, and if there's a more advantageous route to take.
Barbara, that is a great question. I knew it would come up. I'm ready. I have a dozen answers for you. Because if you kind of look that up, everyone, you think, oh, it's the same. Then you start reading on the internet and everyone's like, no, they're really different. And you read the articles, you're like, well, what's different? And that's just a great question. I think of it as on a case-by-case basis. Although, would I prefer that a kinship caregiver has custody? Yes. I think a custody order is more difficult for somebody to come in and challenge and change. If you have legal custody, it's a higher burden for somebody to come in and take that legal custody away from you. But guardianships are difficult to change too. The court is really going to consider the best interest standard of that child. And quite frankly, if you've been caring for this child and this child has been with you, and there's probably a lot of supporting evidence that this child should stay with you, your guardianship's going to be strong and in place as well. But Barbara, like I said, that's such a great question. I think in terms of, as I said, what I would prefer, obviously I would prefer legal custody. Okay. I'll give you a quick case I had a couple of years ago where I had a family, grandparents whose adult daughter had a child, and she was disabled, really unable to really take care of herself. But now all of a sudden they have a baby. And we spoke quite for a length of time. And should they go for custody of this child? Should we go for guardianship? They could have done either or. They decided not to file for custody, to bring their daughter into court and go through all that as far as juvenile court. They just felt that the guardianship was going to be an easier, less contested process for them to go through, which it was. I probably did not answer your question to everyone's satisfaction. But like I said, would I rather a kinship caregiver have legal custody? I would. But the guardianships are very important, and they're still very strong, and you still have full backing of the court, and you actually have that court order. and you still get to make all those decisions that you would make if you had legal custody. That probably was not the best answer, but I was really thinking of it because I knew somebody was going to ask.
There's one more custody question here is how can birth parent get custody of their child? I'm assuming after the grandparent has been provided granted custody. Um, and what is the process that has to happen for that?
Yeah, so if you have legal custody of your grandchild and all of a sudden the parent comes back around and says, "You know what? I want custody back." They have to file that motion. They call it a motion for reallocation of parental rights and responsibilities, a motion or a complaint for legal custody. And they're going to have to go into court. And yes, they're going to have to prove their case. They're going to have to prove to the court that this child should come back and live with them. They're going to have to prove that there's been some type of change, that it's in the best interest of that child to come back to them. Again, it's not an easy standard. If you have your grandchild with you and that grandchild is receiving good medical care, that grandchild is going to school, all of the needs are met, the home is clean and safe, it's going to be very difficult for the parent to try and regain custody unless the parent has really put themselves on that solid footing where they have a home. The courts will look for, as far as the home, hey, where's your lease? Who are you living with? You see what I'm saying? They've got to show that stability. I've had kinship caregivers come in who have had guardianships or legal custody for a number of years. And let's say we had a mom with substance use disorder. Well, mom has straightened out her life. She is clean. She is sober. The grandparents they feel more comfortable and they let the child spend more and more time with mom. And eventually I might have a grandparent who says, you know what? I want that child to go back to mom. Okay. So we want to go to court. I've done a number of these where the parent has really overcome a lot of obstacles, and through agreement of the parties, the child will go back to the parent. That's not often the case, but that does occasionally happen. Kind of answer your question, but the gist is no matter what, whether if you have custody, they have to file that motion. If you have guardianship, they would have to file a motion to have you removed as guardian. Okay.
That's important for caregivers to know because I know one of the biggest fears is that if the parent isn't in a situation where they are able to be responsible, the caregiver is always so afraid that that parent is going to come to the home and just take the child away.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to have some kind of legal authority set up. Now, we have many kinship caregivers who suddenly find themselves with a grandchild that is placed with them by Children's Services. And we look for Children's Services to go to court and to file that case in court to try and give you a temporary or interim custody order. That doesn't often happen. And sometimes you got to press your caseworker a little bit. Fine, I love my grandchild. You can bring my grandchild to my home, but you got to say, well, what legal authority do I have? I'm in how do I get this child to school? I'm in a new school district. How do I enroll that child? Maybe Children's Services has just started with a safety plan, okay? But it doesn't really give you that legal authority. So sometimes you got to press them a little bit. And how do you press them a little bit? You make sure they understand the history, all right? I doubt whatever happened to cause that child to come live with you is the one and only time that something has happened, okay? So you need to let them know what has been going on the last number of years, and you want them to file that. Now, that doesn't often happen, and sometimes we get referrals where that does happen, and I will go in and file for custody, okay? I really have to consider the facts and circumstances because the goal, once that grandchild is placed with you, the goal under the law is reunification with the parent, which is a good thing. If the grandparent or if the parent can stabilize their lives, if they could get into treatment, if they could get into therapy, if they can get out of that domestic violence relationship, okay? But the goal is reunification. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes as kinship caregivers, you have to make the hard choice to go in and file either a guardianship or a custody. And yes, it is a hard choice because I've seen my grandparents struggle. What is this going to do to the family? How is this going to impact my relationship with my son and daughter? And these are very emotional, difficult decisions to make.
As a follow-up, and you're just triggering, I think, a lot of issues that the caregivers have. Is there any legal help for parents when they have finally maybe gotten themselves together and want to go back into court to petition for have custody returned?
Yes, we have um, broadened the scope of our project, our opioid project, where if a parent has maintained their sobriety, if they're having a relationship with their children, then they can provide, and they have overcome all the obstacles and barriers as to why they lost custody. We would consider filing that. More often than not, however, what I do is I say, hey, we're going to start this a little slower. You had substance use disorder. You haven't been seeing your child in a number of years. The grandparents or kinship caregivers, they don't trust you. So you better start at the beginning and try and establish visitation or parenting time with that child. Okay. And so we have gone in and we have assisted parents to try and set up that visitation parenting time with their child, because quite frankly, parents with substance use disorder, it is that stigma that will follow them everywhere. I had a case just a year ago where I had a mom that substance use disorder, and it was pretty bad, and she did lose custody of her little girl. And 5 years later, boy, she's gotten her life back on track. But in those intervening 5 years, based upon the court order, the visitation or the parenting time was left up to the agreement of the parties. Okay. Which meant dad had a lot to say whether mom was going to see this child. But what he did was, as she continued down her treatment path and her sobriety path, he let her start seeing her little girl quite a bit. He would go out of town for weeks at a time. That little girl was staying with mom. Mom was seeing the child every weekend, really spending a lot of time with her daughter. And all of a sudden, dad got mad at her for some reason. Okay. And I'm not going to get into the facts of why that was. But you know what he did? He stopped letting mom see her little girl. And she had been doing this now for about 3 years. All right. Poof, just like that. He said, you're not seeing her anymore. That was a case I did take on and successfully litigate. And she's got the standard order with her little girl. They're doing great, by the way. Did she want custody coming in? Did she want to get custody back? She did. And I had to tell her, I said, look, I'm not going to do that for you. But what I can do for you is to make sure you start seeing your child again. I did not file for custody from her, and I'm not going to get into all the reasons. But to answer that question, yes, there is some legal help available through our project for parents who would like to get custody returned. But for the most part, I would say kinship caregivers doing a good job. I don't really have a basis for a change in custody, and it can't just be because the parent comes in and say, now I want custody. There's got to be a lot more to it. But generally speaking, I don't file those, but I will file so the parent can see their child. And in many times, it's at one of the visitation centers, okay? Because as grandparents, y'all are going to be on edge if that child starts seeing a parent who has, for example, substance use disorder, maybe a parent with violence issues. You're sure as heck not going to allow that child to just drive off, right? I'll give you one more story. I represented a grandmother who got custody of her grandson. What is he now? 7, 8 years old. They've had custody for about 5 years. I think, yeah, mom is still involved, doesn't live far from, it's the maternal grandmother. All of a sudden, 5 years later, they get a text message from dad saying, hey, I want to come pick up my son. Well, it's been 5 years. This child is 6 years old. You all think this child knows who his dad is? The answer is no. Do you think my client was going to allow dad to come pick up this child? The answer is no. Okay. But what she did offer him, she said, look, you can come over and see him like you used to in our home. Well, dad wasn't going to do that. Wasn't going to do this. So he filed a contempt. He filed a contempt charge against grandmother for failure to allow his parenting time. Okay. I had a great case. It's been 5 years. Where you been for 5 years? Okay. And I knew darn good and well that the court was not going to allow him to just start seeing this child on the standard order. He got a lawyer. I spoke with that lawyer. The lawyer was not given all of the accurate information. Ultimately, the result of that case, he decided to dismiss his case. My client was going to work with him to see his son at her house. And that was about a year ago, and asked me if we've ever heard from him again. The answer is no. Okay. But there are going to be occasions as kinship caregivers where you're going to have to stand up and make those decisions for the best interest of that child. What is in that child's best interest to come see his dad? And this dad was still not in recovery for a substance use disorder. And as a matter of fact, just 6 months before he decided to start seeing his child, he was arrested for domestic violence again. Okay. So he had a lot going against him. And we've gotten off on a tangent here. But I think, some of the scenarios we talk about, maybe, you all think maybe that's kind of what I got going on. Okay.
Right. And I think that's the key here is that I think, we sort of interrupted your flow, but
No.
I think it's important to address what you're doing. It's very important.
Absolutely.
There's a couple of other clarifications that somebody has about the guardianship and legal custody. If you already if they already have legal custody, is it necessary to obtain guardianship?
No, it's not. No.
Okay, good. And then one other one is I know a lot of times the terms for custody you hear temporary, permanent, and legal custody, and I know people have different interpretations. Can you sort of define or clarify those different terms that are being thrown around a lot?
Sure. Okay. Think of temporary custody and interim custody. They're interchangeable. It can be called temporary custody. Legally, most of the time it's called interim temporary custody, where the court has found that the situation is such that as a kinship caregiver, you need to have that immediate decision-making ability. We most often see this in terms of enrolling a child in school or medical decisions, where you're going to ask that court to give me interim temporary custody or temporary custody, versus in the end, what you're hoping for is legal custody. The term permanent legal custody is a fiction. You'll hear people throw that around. That's not really a term. There's no permanent legal custody. You have legal custody. It's not permanent because it's always subject to the jurisdiction of the court. So if somebody says I have permanent legal custody, I mean, they can say that, but that's not necessarily accurate. They have legal custody. And there are just different steps. You might find that if you go in and file for custody pro se, as a part of that, you might need to file for emergency interim temporary custody. There's an emergency going on. You have this child with you. This child needs to be enrolled in school. Maybe this child has significant medical needs where you've got to be able to go to the doctor. Okay. So in that case, you'd be filing for some kind of emergency interim temporary custody. So yeah, these legal terms, they are very important. And as far as your case and where you're at, ultimately you're trying for legal custody. There's another term called shared parenting. Well, in juvenile court, split custody, grandparents, between grandparents and parents, they don't really call that shared parenting. They call that joint custody in juvenile court. Whereas in domestic relations court, a husband and wife, they'd have shared parenting. And I have been a part of many cases where a grandparent does have joint custody with a grandchild and a parent. So yeah, it can get very, very confusing. It certainly can.
Okay, thank you. I think we've cleared up all the questions in the chat, so we can move on.
I'm happy to talk about it. And as you all probably imagine, I had a lot of coffee this morning, so I am ready. So, what is a guardianship? It's the position of being legally responsible for the care who is unable to manage their own affairs. That could be either a minor, or as we talked about, I wanted to throw this in here, emancipation, when a child turns 18 and is legally considered an adult. Emancipation, obviously, they can make decisions for themselves. But for an 18-year-old, he or she is unable due to disability to make decisions or care for themselves, financial, medical, and other life decisions. And of course, that goes to say under 18, unable to make decisions. They're minors. That's why you're doing this. Okay. And so when we talk about shifting around here, let's say your grandchild has been with you. He or she is now 18. They're mentally impaired. And as a result of that mental or physical illness, the court is going to consider them incompetent under Ohio law. I really don't like that word, but it's not changed. That's really the standard incompetency. All right. If you care for grandchildren who are over 18, you file for the adult. If they're under 18, you file for a minor. Okay. Okay. So the application process, at least in Montgomery County, has really gotten a lot easier. Montgomery County, Ohio Probate Court, I simply cannot say enough about their form section. You click on the kind of case you're going to do. They give you a checklist. If you're filing for a minor guardianship application, you'll see all the forms there, the instructions. And we're going to go through there are so many forms. I had a lot of slides, but I narrowed it down. But I wanted to let you know that for those of you not in Montgomery County, check your own probate courts, like Franklin County out in Columbus, same thing. Some of the other outlying courts, our smaller courts, will direct you to the Ohio Supreme Court website, guardianship form section, and they have forms there for you that can be used wherever in the state. Okay. So that's the biggest thing with the guardianship process are the forms, and there's a lot of them. Okay. And I threw this in here. When you file for that guardianship case, the court investigator will be coming out to your home to pay a very good visit to you. It's not anything like you have to worry about. These investigators are very nice people. They bring the paperwork. They will serve the person you filed on. They will talk to that person. They'll get a feel of what's going on, and then they'll make a report to the court. Okay. Okay, let's see. Now, if you're filing for an adult guardianship, your grandchild is over 18, they have the right to be represented by attorney. They have the right to contest it. They have all the rights. Their rights are not taken away. For the most part, we don't see many contested cases. Usually, when you're filing guardianship for a minor, it's pretty clear cut that minor is with you. That minor needs to stay with you. It's in the minor's best interest to be with you. And if you're filing on somebody who's over 18 with that guardianship, you're going to have a statement of expert evaluation from a physician who's going to say to the judge, this is what the ward has. And it's going to be very detailed. And in the end, the physician is going to say, yes, I believe a guardianship needs to be established. You don't have that for guardianship of minor. You don't need a statement of expert evaluation. Okay. Now, you've got all your paperwork filed, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. You go the day of, you've served the right people, and we're going to talk about that. It's mainly serving mom and dad. You're going to go into court. You're kind of nervous, but don't be. It's a very quick hearing. The court is going to make an inquiry of you. They're going to review the application process. They're going to listen to a little bit of your testimony. All right. And they're going to make a determination that a guardianship is necessary, and then you will receive your letters of appointment. Okay. So it can be stressful, but as I said, with guardianships, it's mainly a paper process. It's getting all the forms filed. And if you do this pro se, don't be surprised if you take all your forms to the clerk's office. You've got all your copies. They might look at them and say, you're missing this, or they'll take them, call you the next day and say, no, you got this wrong. That's okay. I tell my pro se persons that sometimes you got to go back a couple of times, and it's nothing to be upset about. Don't make the clerks angry. They're there to help you, and they want to help you. Okay. Shoot, even if I file, sometimes I get them kicked back to me because I did something wrong. Don't tell anyone I said that. I'm kidding. I didn't do anything wrong. Maybe I missed a document. Maybe something was missing from one of the pages. Okay. And again, this is the website for Montgomery County Probate Court. And I would encourage all of you, if you're thinking about filing for guardianships, your county probate court is the best source to go for information. Take a look at the court rules, the local rules. Every court has them. Every court will have a section about guardianships, and you can read it. And like I said, you can do it. You can do it. So here in Montgomery County, and it's probably very similar to the other counties, these are the initial forms you're going to need. And there's a lot of them. But if you get on the website, you can bring them up. You can fill them in yourself. You can print them. Obviously, I'm going to go through these, and then the next slides, I actually pull a couple of these up, and so you can actually see them. Application for appointment of guardian. Obviously, you've got to file your application. Next of kin of proposed ward. Okay, now that's interesting. You got mom and dad, if they're both alive. Where are they living? I have many cases where somebody comes in and says, Mr. Warden, I have no idea where dad is. I have no idea. And so down towards the bottom there, you got another form, affidavit, search for address. And I think that's one of the forms where you're basically going to tell the court is I've looked everywhere. I've looked on the internet. I've talked to family and friends. I have no idea where this parent is. Okay. These other forms, they got to set the hearing. You got to take your oath, waiver and notice of consent. I do have quite a few cases where the parents, let's say I have a kinship caregiver, where mom and dad will agree to just say, you're right. You go ahead and be the guardian. And they can sign this waiver and notice of consent. They don't have to be served, and they can just waive it and say, yes, we want you to be the guardian. Okay. Oath of guardian, acknowledgement to notify the court for change in address if you move. There's another form where the court wants to know where the child has lived for the last 5 years. Affidavit of indigency if you cannot afford that filing fee, and filing fees do get expensive. I should have looked that up here in Montgomery County. I know it's over $300 to file that thing, but if you cannot afford it, they have the affidavit of indigency. Of course, you all have to get your background check. Our court does a great job of instructions and giving you the actual form and telling you what you have to do. We talked about the affidavit of service, search for address. If your grandchild is over 14 years of age, they can actually select you and sign this form and say, yes, I want you to be my guardian. And I put a post-it here, always check for additional forms on the court websites. For the most part, these are pretty steady and they've stayed the same over the years, but some of the forms are new. Like, for example, I think that affidavit of guardian applicant, that's relatively new. So always stay up and check your probate court website. Okay, so I brought up just a couple of forms for you. I don't know if you all have ever seen this. This is your application for the appointment of guardian of a minor. And it was 2 forms, and Jen did a good job. Hopefully you can see it. It says that you're the applicant, you're a resident of what county. It says you're attaching the list of the next of kin. And this spot here, the guardian is necessary because, now you don't have a lot of space to write there, and you don't need to write a book on that. You could write something like, I've had my grandchild with me for the last 6 months. Neither parent is able to care for or support this child. Okay, something very simple like that. And then in the middle, you have what kind of guardianship are you going for? And we talked about person in estate, estate only, person only, non-limited, limited. Those don't really come into play because when I file for a grandparent, I don't want the guardianship limited to, let's say, enrolling the child in school or making a medical decisions. No, y'all are going to need all of that at some point. But we check off the box for person only. And let's see, indefinite or definite. Definite for the minors, usually on their 18th birthday, we put in there. Okay. The next page is important. They want to know if the minor has any kind of an estate. Well, most of them won't have any personal property, real estate, other rental income, other annual income. If you have Social Security the child's receiving, you're going to put that on there. Okay. So that's a pretty straightforward form. And you'll see at the top of every one of these forms, guardianship of. That's where you're going to put your grandchild's name, the full name as on the birth certificate. Some people tell you different, maybe just use the middle initial. It's just a little point that I always try and use the absolute full name as shown on the birth certificate. Little pet peeve of mine. All right. Next of kin. That's the form we were talking about. Okay. The name, address, relationship. For the most part, you're going to have mom and dad on here. Okay. Um, and the box to the left, service waive. That's if both parents will sign that waiver, or if one, you can check that box. Maybe your daughter consents to you being a guardian, and maybe dad doesn't, or maybe you can't even find dad, so you wouldn't check that box. But that was another form that I wanted you all to see. And this other form, and I put this one in here because it comes up so often where you just can't find one of the parents. I've got a case right now. The last we knew of dad, he's somewhere in Kentucky. And I try and do my search through court records down there. And I see an old address, but, you just don't know. Maybe a parent has just not been in a grandchild's life from birth. And so this is the form you would use to tell the court that you did try and search for that address. Okay, this is an important form, affidavit of guardian applicant. The court, as a guardian, they're going to want to know about you. Do you have any criminal convictions in the past? Do you have any pending misdemeanors or felonies, or have you ever been charged or convicted? And I had a case here not too long ago where the guy was like, well, that was 20 years ago, and I think I got that sealed, so I don't want to put that down there. I don't want the court to know that I think it was some kind of disorderly conduct or something years ago. Well, you know what? We're going to put that in there because that background check is going to show it. I did some searching, come to find out that was not sealed. Right? It was still there. And so you don't ever want to be in a position where you're not being completely honest with the court. Okay. So I wanted to just, and that doesn't come up too often, but I've had cases with grandparents where, 20, 25 years ago, something did happen. So you have to make disclosure on that form. There's the waiver of notice and consent. If the parent or one parent or both would agree that you should be the guardian, that's the form they sign. Okay. So now that you've been appointed guardian, there are certain things you have to do. Okay. You have reporting. You have to do a guardian's report. It's not as bad as it sounds. I think it's like a 3 or 4 page document. You got to file your guardianship plan. Again, pretty statement, pretty basic form. And if you have a guardianship on a grandchild who's over 18, your statement of expert evaluation is due every other year. Although with the second filing, the doctor can sign the affidavit at the end saying this young person's condition is never going to change, and the court will waive future filings by the doctor. Oh, also, I don't know if that's on the next slide. I want to tell all of you that in the state of Ohio, there's guardianship education requirements now, where if you're appointed guardian, you will have to do an online class. I think it's like 6 hours, but I think it can be broken up, and that is required. And every guardianship in the probate court you file in will tell you more about that. So how do we work our referrals for our partners? Okay, there's our referral form. It's a very basic form. We wanted it to be simple and seamless. At the very top, our partners, whoever it would be, a social worker, they'd put their name. They're referring the person to us, the applicant's name, basic information, the child's name, date of birth, and then we have various areas that can be checked off. Family law, domestic violence, divorce, custody, other guardianship, child support, housing. You can see it breaks down just like what we talked about earlier. Okay. So for any of you, and I think I've got a map here. Let me just go. Okay, there's our map. Okay. So for any of you in those counties, well, our medical legal partnership is mainly up in Lucas, surrounding counties. Down here in Montgomery, I work Montgomery, Preble, Greene, Clark, Dark, Shelby, Camp. I usually work most of the counties down here. And you can see if you're where your child treats at, you can ask and see if they have a medical legal partnership. Outside of The big ones here in Montgomery County I know up in Lucas County, they have a couple of big hospitals up there we have medical legal partnerships with. But if you all need help with this, even if your medical provider doesn't have a medical legal partnership, obviously we want to encourage you to call legal aid line. I just skipped ahead to this slide. There's our 1-800 number. Okay. It can't hurt to apply. Obviously, not every case is acceptable, and you may not get a referral to the medical legal partnership, but it never hurts to apply. And there's you can apply online at Legal Aid Line. Let me go back a couple of slides here. Kind of put these out of order. All right, there was my referral form. And I get those from my providers. I get them, like I said, from all my providers. Dayton Children's Hospital, Rocking Horse Community Health Center in Clark County, community health centers, Five Rivers Health Centers. And they come in fast and frequent. All right, let's go to, okay. So when we talk about what we're after here for the MLP, all right, we want to improve your patient health outcomes. How do we do that? We're not doctors, but we can reduce your stress. We can stabilize the home. Getting a guardianship in place is a huge stress reliever. Remove barriers to healthcare for low-income families by addressing costs and insurance concerns, including issues related to Social Security, which, as I said, I think we need to probably do a whole hour on that. Increase access for individuals and families, safe, stable housing, family stability, domestic violence, protection orders, a lot of things that y'all are probably impacted by. And of course, education is very important because y'all are going to be very involved in your grandchild's education. Where are they at? Are they up to where they need to be? Maybe they're behind. Maybe they're having trouble with reading. Maybe they're having trouble with speech. For the most part, we're always hopeful that the schools will work with you. But sometimes you might have a disagreement with them and you might need some legal assistance. Let's see what else we have there. Yeah, obviously kinship caregivers, custody, guardianships. I just want to tell you all that when I talked about how sometimes I see my kinship caregivers really struggling with that decision. I had a client a while back where she takes care of her grandson literally all the time. Mom is deceased, dad is out and about staying with his girlfriend, whatever, and she really feels she needs to get custody, but she's afraid to do it. She's afraid that he is going to come and take that child from her, and she's worried she doesn't get a lot of financial support from dad. And she decided not to do anything at this point. But my point for that story is that oftentimes it's an emotional struggle to make that right decision when you're so concerned about what's going to happen. And sometimes the parents who are not fit will use that and hang that over a grandparent's head. You know, you go for custody, I'm taking this child. You'll never see this child. So, as I said, I'm with you. It's very emotional to make these kinds of decisions. Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. You are, here's a good question before I make a comment. What about giving custody or guardianship to someone else if your health is starting to be affected or you have to do some planning, future planning for the care of that child?
Yeah, and we do see that come up. There's not an easy answer to that. For some of my kinship caregivers, I have prepared their last will and testaments. I've made their wishes known in a last will and testament as to whom they feel would be the appropriate caregiver. Again, there's no guarantee of it, but yeah, it's always a worry. It is always a worry. But if you have somebody else who you feel would be a guardian, I believe there's a form that you can fill out as to who you want to be the successor guardian. Like 99.9% certain that you can file that. And I think we have that form here in Montgomery County. But it's always a question. I've got a couple of cases right now where I do worry about my kinship caregivers and what's going to happen to that child if something should happen to them. And hopefully there's another family member or other person who is involved in that child's life who would step up. Um, it's a great question. There's not an easy answer to it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have an easy answer to it.
Well,
We
that's
we yeah, we think of things filing that form for a successor guardian, or you put something in your last will and testament. For me, I like to go a little deeper when I do those in the last will and testament. But again, it feels good to have that done, but there's no guarantee that's going to happen. There's no guarantee that the court's even going to consider what you wrote in your last will and testament. But you want to make sure as you begin to think about the future that you do have somebody in mind. Um, maybe it's an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, maybe it's another adult grandson or granddaughter that you're going to talk to and say, look, if something happens to me, this is what I'd like you to do. That's a good question, and it's not easy to answer or to even think about.
and then that person that you may have talked with or designated, it's their responsibility then to go into the court system and file for whatever might work, the custody or the guardianship then?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
If I have a grandparent who is deceased, yeah, obviously they can't do anything. So it'd be up to that person to say, hey, I've been very close to this child for many years, and I'd like to have custody. Now, again, you might get a parent coming out and saying, no way, child's coming back to me, and it could be a real custody battle. And I've seen that happen.
Okay. We're sort of getting towards the end. We're about 10 till noon. But I wanted to clarify that this presentation is being recorded, and it will be posted on the OGKC website, as well as hopefully if Mr. or Attorney Warden provides us with his PowerPoint, we will also include that
Yeah.
on our website. And these are questions that come up constantly around custody and guardianship. And I know I've been really educated here, although I've heard these presentations on a number of times. The more you hear them, the more it makes sense and it is clarified for people in their individual situations. The other question that I have that I know you went into the guardianship, which was good because we haven't had a lot of clarification about guardianship. But in order for people to also address the custody issues, if they go to their county juvenile court, they will get the same opportunity to find out the forms that they need to file on their own if they go pro se. And most of the courts will help them go through that process in filing those forms.
Yeah, certainly. And like I said, at least in Montgomery County, we've got great people at the court downstairs in citizen service that can help you. And it is a struggle to file pro se, but you can do it. As I said, most of the courts around the state, they do have pro se forms. And if not, the Supreme Court, you can actually Google in Ohio Supreme Court forms, custody, juvenile court. Those are some key words. And it'll bring you up all the forms you can use that are accepted in all the probate or in all the juvenile courts in the state. And I am seeing some great questions here, and I do apologize that we've not gotten to all these.
I think we've probably touched on most of them. Some of them were comments about the situations, like Mr. Dimitrakis, and I think he even got some help from one of the organizations online, so that's been helpful. But I think we did address almost all of the issues that were presented. So it's been an excellent presentation. Again, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying I so enjoyed it. And not that I want to get a million emails, but I do respond. And so if I didn't get some of your answers, feel free to reach out to me. I can only do so much because you're not really clients. So I can't do a lot by way of counsel and advice, but I might be able to connect you to a resource. I don't mind doing that, or Barbara, maybe if they want to go through you. And I apologize. You all asked such great questions, and just given that opportunity today to cover so many of these areas. They're all so intertwined. And like I said, it's just it's very difficult to navigate through a lot of these issues that have suddenly come into your home, not issues, bad issues, but suddenly, you have a grandchild with you. And there's a lot to think about. There is a lot to think about, a lot of pressure and a lot of stress.
Yeah, exactly. And we've had other Zoom presentations that deal with the trauma of that. Not only trauma to the child, but trauma to the caregiver, because they go through trauma too when these situations happen. So we recognize that also. I do want to announce the recipient of our $50 gift card for this meeting. It is Andrea Porter, and I think she's still on. So Andrea, I have your email. I'll be contacting you about your mailing address so we can get you the gift card. And again, this has been recorded, and Mr. Warden, if you provide us with your PowerPoint, we will also actually post that on our website also.
Yes. And
And
I want to give a quick plug because I see Ohio Can is obviously here. Quick shout out to them. They're just amazing. They do amazing things as well. And they've provided their phone number. And thank you, Lindsay, right? Yeah, if she's still on here.
Lindsay Christian, yes,
Yes,
yes. Thank
thank
you,
you.
Lindsay, for
I'm
some of
sorry
your
I've
responses.
missed some meetings, but I'm going to try and get back into them.
And last but not least, there will normally we don't have a July meeting. We sort of take that off for people to have vacation time, but we may have a possible meeting on July 15th about fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. And we've been approached by the health agency that addresses the fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, and asking if we want a presentation. So that's something we're considering, and we'll make sure we get that information out to everybody. I don't know. I think there are a couple of our officers on the call today. Miss Dewberry, who is from Dayton and is actively involved in kinship care there as a caregiver herself. And then Ronald Browder, he's on. He's a board member also. I don't know if any of them have any comments. So I'll give it to them and then we can close out.
I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Warden, for your presentation. I really learned a lot of good information about guardianship. And you're right, it is a daunting task, but in the end, it's worth it, especially if you've been caring for a young person since they were 5 years old and now turning 18.
Thank you, Brenda.
I'd like to also say that I think it's been a very helpful workshop and so presentation. So we thank you, Attorney Warden, and looking forward to having you back again. I'm sure there'll be additional questions and additional issues that families will bring to our attention that we would probably call upon you for. So thank you again.
Thank you, Ronald.
Well, thank you everybody for attending. It was a good group and we had excellent questions, and hopefully we started a conversation that we will continue in the future, and looking forward to possibly having Attorney Warden and his partner back on at a future date and addressing some of those issues around Social Security, because I know that it comes up quite a bit too about Social Security and benefits and the application process itself. So thank you everybody, and keep enjoying the summer and stay cool.
Stay cool today. Bye-bye.